Hi all, I am Harsha JS, 21 UBC 132. Today I am going to discuss about constitutional obligations and values. Constitutional obligations are legally binding duties and responsibilities imposed on governments, governmental institutions, and sometimes citizens by a nation's constitution. These obligations define the limits of governmental power and outline the procedures and standards that must be followed in governance. They often include provisions related to the protection of individual rights, the separation of powers, the conduct of elections, the engagement of laws, and the administration of justice. Constitutional obligations are fundamental to the functioning of a constitutional democracy, as they establish the rules by which government operates and ensure that government officials are held accountable for their actions. Failure to adhere to constitutional obligations may result in legal challenges, political instability, or even constitutional crisis. So, some of the examples of constitutional obligations are protection of individual rights. Many constitutions include provisions that protect fundamental rights such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, as well as right to due process, privacy, and equality before the law. Second one is separation of powers. Constitutions often establish separate branches of government, such as executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and prescribe the powers and duties of each branch to prevent the concentration of power in any one institution. Third one is a rule of law. Constitutions typically require governments to operate according to the law and ensure that all individuals, including government officials, are subject to legal constraints and procedures. Democratic governance. Constitutions may mandate democratic principles and processes such as free and fair elections, the protection of minority rights, and mechanisms for citizen participation in government decision making. Federalism. In federal systems, constitution often allocate powers and responsibilities between central and regional governments and establish mechanisms for cooperation and dispute resolution. Key constitutional values. Constitutional values are the fundamental principles, ideals, and beliefs that underpin a nation's constitution. They serve as the moral and philosophical foundation upon which constitutional obligations and laws are built. Constitutional values reflect the aspirations, and collective ethos of a society, guiding the interpretation and application of constitutional provisions. While specific constitutional values may vary between countries, some common examples are democracy, equality, freedom, justice, and human dignity. Challenges. Political interference. Political leaders or institutions may attempt to undermine constitutional obligations and values for their own gain, disregarding the rule of law, separation of powers, and democratic principles. This can lead to erosion of trust in institutions and weaken the foundation of democracy. Corruption and cronyism. Corruption within government institutions can hinder the proper implementation of constitutional obligations and values. When officials prioritize personal gain over public interest, it can lead to abuse of power, unequal treatment, and disregard for individual rights. Legal interpretation. Differences in interpretation of constitutional provisions by courts, lawmakers, and government officials can create uncertainty and inconsistency in the application of constitutional obligations and values. Controversial issues such as the scope of individual rights, the balance of powers, and the limits of government authority often lead to contentious legal debates. Social polarization. Societal divisions along lines of ideology, identity, or socioeconomic status can impede efforts to uphold constitutional obligations and values. Polarization may lead to political gridlock, intolerance, and resistance to compromise, hindering the implementation of inclusive and equitable policies. And other challenges are threats to civil liberties, weak institutions, and erosion of public trust. Importance of constitutional obligations and values. Holding democratic governance. Constitutional obligations and values are essential for maintaining democratic governance by establishing the framework for fair and accountable leadership. They ensure that the power is distributed among different branches of government, preventing any one entity from being too powerful. Protecting individual rights. Constitutional obligations and values are crucial for protecting individuals' rights and freedom against encroachment by the states or other individuals. By enshrining fundamental rights such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, constitutions provide a shield against tyranny and oppression. Adherence to constitutional obligations and values promote stability within a society by providing a framework for resolving conflicts and disputes peacefully, thus contributing to stability. Ensuring justice. By establishing legal frameworks based on fairness, equality, and due process, constitutions ensure that all individuals have access to justice and are protected from arbitrary actions by the state. Then, driving social progress. By promoting principles such as equality, pluralism, and human dignity, constitutions create an environment conducive to innovation, creativity, and social cohesion. So, in conclusion, constitutional obligations and values are super important for making sure governments treat people fairly and keep the peace. They set the rules for how leaders should act and protect our rights. When everyone follows these rules, it helps keep things stable, fair, and moving forward. But times there are challenges. Things like corrupt leaders or disagreement over what the rules mean can cause problems. So thank you.